accepting the floor.
I thank the senator from Kentucky. I would note that he and I agree on a great many issues, although we don't agree entirely on this issue. But I want to take the opportunity to thank the senator from Kentucky for his passionate defense of liberty. His is a voice that this body needs to listen to. I would note the senator from Kentucky's father spent decades in the House of Representatives as a passionate advocate for liberty. And both his father's voice and the senator from Kentucky's voice has altered the debate in this chamber and has helped refocused the United States Congress and the American people on the critical importance of defending our liberty. I think protecting the Bill of Rights is a fundamental responsibility of the federal government. And it is heartbreaking over the last 6 years that we have seen a federal government that not only fails to protect the Bill of Rights, but that routinely violates the constitutional liberties of American citizens, routinely violates the Bill of Rights. You know, I listened to the learned remarks and questions from the senator from Utah, where he noted that under the justifications for the current bulk collection of metadata, that it is the position of the federal government that they have the full constitutional authority not only to collect metadata, but to collect the positional location of every American if any of us carry our cell phone wherever we go. It is the position of the Obama administration that the federal government has the full constitutional authority to track the location of every American citizen no matter where we walk. That is a breathtaking assertion of power. And I would note that we don't merely need to speculate that that's the Obama administration's position. Indeed, in a recent case before the United States Supreme Court, the Obama administration argued that law enforcement could place a GPS locator on the automobile of any and every law-abiding citizen in this country and track the location of your automobile and my automobile with no probable cause, no articulable suspicion, no nothing. The Obama administration argued that the Fourth Amendment and the Bill of Rights say nothing about the federal government placing a GPS locator on the automobile of private law-abiding citizens. Now, thankfully, the United States Supreme Court rejected that position. It didn't reject that position 5-4 or 6-3 or 7-2. The United States Supreme Court rejected that radical anti-privacy position of the Obama administration unanimously, 9-0. Now, I am entirely in agreement with my friend, the senator from Utah, that the right resolution of the issue before this body is for the United States Senate to pass the USA Freedom Act. I'm an original sponsor of that bipartisan legislation. The USA Freedom Act does two things. Number one, it ends the federal government's bulk collection of phone metadata for law-abiding citizens. I am entirely in agreement with my friend, the senator from Kentucky, that the federal government should not be collecting the data of millions of law-abiding citizens with no evidentiary basis to do so. It is long past time to end this program, and the USA Freedom Act does so. At the same time, the USA Freedom Act maintains the tools to target terrorists. We're living in a dangerous world with the rise of ISIS and Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram, not to mention Al-Qaeda and radical Islamic terrorism across the globe. The threat to the American homeland has never been greater. And it is critical that law enforcement and national security maintain the tools so that if there is a credible basis to believe that a particular individual is planning a terrorist attack, that we can intercept their communications, we can prevent that terrorist attack before, God forbid, they murder innocent Americans on the homeland. Now, Now, the critical words there are a particular individual, because what the Fourth Amendment envisions is not that law enforcement's hands are tied. Law enforcement has tools to stop crimes. But as my friend the senator from Kentucky has so powerfully observed, the Fourth Amendment was designed to prevent general warrants. It was designed to prevent the government from assuming that everyone in the country is automatically guilty and we will seize your information. Rather, the tools of law enforcement and national security should be particularized based on the facts and the evidence. That's why I support the USA Freedom Act, because it accomplishes both goals. It protects our privacy rights and the Bill of Rights of law-abiding citizens, but it ensures we have the tools to prevent acts of terrorism. Now, I would note 2 points that are important. There are a number of members of this body, including a number of members of my party and the party of the senator from Kentucky, who argue the Patriot Act should be reauthorized with no changes. And they argue to do anything else would jeopardize our national security. Well, there are two facts that are critical to assess to responding to that argument. Number one, the members of this body have received confidential classified briefings from the national security officers of this administration. We are not at liberty to convey the specific details of those briefings. But the members of this body have been told, number one, that the USA Freedom Act would provide effective tools so that we could prevent acts of terrorism. And indeed, they've gone further to say that it is entirely possible that under the USA Freedom Act, the national security team would have more effective tools to stop actual terrorists than they do today under the bulk metadata collection of law-abiding citizens. That's worth underscoring. The national security professionals advising this body have said the USA Freedom Act could well be more effective in providing the tools to stop terrorists than the current status quo. That argument needs to sit in. For everyone arguing we've got to maintain the status quo to stop terrorism, if it is the case, as we have been told, that the USA Freedom Act could be more effective, that argument suddenly falls to the ground. And secondly, I address my friends in the Republican Party who would prefer to reauthorize the Patriot Act, even if that is their preference. It is abundantly clear that a clean reauthorization of the Patriot Act ain't passing this body, and it certainly ain't passing the House of Representatives. I would note that the USA Freedom Act passed the House of Representatives 338 to 88. It wasn't a narrow victory. It was overwhelming. So even if members of this body would prefer to reauthorize the Patriot Act in its entirety, the votes ain't there. So the choice they face is letting it expire altogether, losing the tools we have to prevent real terrorists from carrying out active terrorism, or accepting a common-sense middle ground that vigorously protects the Bill of Rights while maintaining the tools to target the bad guys. Now, I will say this. With my friend, the senator from Kentucky, I entirely agree that he is fully entitled to introduce his amendments to that bill. That this body should engage in a full and open debate considering amendments, and the senator from Kentucky should be able to propose reasonable common sense improvements to the USA Freedom Act. We ought to debate them on the merits in a full and open process. There was a time not too long ago when this body was called the world's greatest deliberative body. Debate is what we're supposed to do on the merits. And if the defenders of the Patriot Act right now are so confident of their position, they should be prepared to debate the senator from Kentucky on the merits, to debate each of the members of this body on the merits, and to arrive at the right policy that both protects our constitutional rights, and ensures we have all the tools we need to protect the safety of American citizens against active terrorism. Now, I will note, standing here with the senator from Kentucky, with the senator from Utah at 11:40 p.m., I'm reminded of the movie The Blues Brothers, saying, "Jake, we got to get the band back together again." I'm reminded of previous evenings, standing here with this same band of brothers in the wee hours of the morn. And I'll make a couple of final observations in this question. The first is, the very first time I ever spoke on the Senate floor, when I was a brand new freshman senator, was during the last time the senator from Kentucky was filibustering. Senator Rand Paul was filibustering against the Obama administration's policy of uncontrolled drone strikes and the refusal of the Obama administration to acknowledge that the Constitution prohibits the federal government from using a drone to target a United States citizen with lethal force if that citizen does not pose an imminent threat on U.S. soil. When the senator from Kentucky began that filibuster that morning, he had asked if I might come out and support him, and I told him at the time, as a newbie in this body, that I wanted to respect the institutions of the Senate, which include the tradition that freshman senators should stay quiet for a number of months before speaking. So initially I said, no, I'm not going to come down. It's not yet time for me to speak on the Senate floor, and yet he stood there, and 1 hour and 2 hours passed. I could not stand back without joining him in that support, in that epic fight. That time, I'm reminded, it was an anniversary of the Battle of the Alamo, so I had the opportunity to read to my friend William Barrett Travis's letter from the Alamo, and to give him the encouragement of Texans who gave their lives in defense of liberty. And indeed, at the time, to read tweets that were sent in support of the senator from Kentucky. And I've said many times, I will go to my grave in debt to Senator Rand Paul that the first opportunity I had to speak on the Senate floor was in support of his epic filibuster. I would also note that following that filibuster, Senator Paul gave me two pieces of advice, both of which proved very helpful for a filibuster I was to do of my own several months later. Advice number one, he said, was wear comfortable shoes. And I would note Senator Paul observed that the last time he did that, he didn't follow this advice. He hadn't planned to speak as long as he had. He told me his feet hurt for 2 weeks. And I will confess it was to my great shame. I'm wearing today my argument boots, which I wear every day on the Senate floor. But when I filibustered on Obamacare, I shamefully left my boots in the closet and went and purchased black tennis shoes. And as the hours wore on, I was very, very grateful that I had abided by Senator Paul's good advice and wore the tennis shoes. And I would note, as I'm sitting here today, that the good senator is wearing tennis shoes today, so I'm glad to see that he follows his own advice, and I have no doubt that his calves and thighs will thank him tonight in the morning. The second bit of advice Senator Paul gave me was drink very, very little water. Now, that was advice he acknowledged likewise he had not followed in his own filibuster. And I will note, not too long ago, I was sitting in the president's chair presiding, and the entire hour I was there was a glass of water on Senator Paul's desk, and he did not drink a sip of it. I would note that was advice I endeavored to follow. It was good advice, and I'm glad to see my friend is following it as well. This is an exceptionally important issue that this body should be focused on, the responsibility to protect the Bill of Rights and the constitutional rights of every American. And so the question I would ask my friend, the senator from Kentucky, is there any excuse for this body not taking seriously our obligation to protect the Bill of Rights and the constitutional rights of privacy of every American.
I want to thank the senator from Texas for joining in the battle to defend the Bill of Rights and the Fourth Amendment, and I know he's sincere in that approach. There's absolutely no excuse not to debate this and no excuse not to vote on sufficient amount of amendments to try to make this better, to try to make the bulk collection of records go away. It's what the American people want. It's what the Constitution demands. My voice is rapidly leaving. My bedtime is long since passed. And I think it's time that we summarize why we're here today and what my hope is for the future with this issue. We've had a dozen senators come down from both parties, from right and left, conservative, liberal, progressive, libertarian. We've had several friends come over from the House as well. There's a hunger in America for somebody to stand up, for all of us to stand up, for somebody to do the right thing, to say that the Bill of Rights needs to be defended, that the Bill of Rights is important. When I think of the Bill of Rights, I think, it isn't so much for the popular person. It isn't so much for the high school quarterback or the prom queen. The Bill of Rights is for the least among us. And the Bill of Rights is to try to prevent any kind of systemic bias from entering into the law or the way we treat people. People will say, well, we collect all this data, but we're not abusing anyone. We're doing it perfectly in order. But I agree with Senator Lee that just the collection of the data is the infringement in itself. The whole idea that we could put one name on a warrant and collect 100 million records goes against everything we believe in. It goes against everything we fought for in the Revolution when we fought to be left alone. I think Justice Brandeis put it best when he said that the right to be left alone is the most cherished of rights, the most prized among civilized men. To be left alone. To be left alone in our castle, or in today's world, to be left alone in our cloud. The time is long since past where we're going to have paper records and that it's going to be our exact home, our exact castle that we're protecting. The time is now in the digital age that we need to protect our privacy when we loan out our records. And it is different to loan out your records and let them to be held by a telephone company or by an internet provider or in the cloud. It doesn't mean that you give up your right to privacy. I think that you have an expectation of privacy with or without a contract, but often we have an explicit privacy agreement, an explicit privacy contract that we actually have with the phone company, that we actually have with the internet provider. They're supposed to protect our interests. It sends exactly the wrong signal to give liability to these companies, liability protection to these companies, and say to them that they can run roughshod with us and that they can give their information out. The bulk collection must end, and I think we have the votes to do it now. We need to end the bulk collection of records, but that's not where this battle ends. There still is a question of whether or not the executive is gathering a great deal of information through executive order. I think that has to be reviewed. It has to be reviewed in public. I agree with my friend Senator Wyden that the specifics of intelligence, who the agents are, how we break code, how we technologically gather information, by all means doesn't need to be discussed in public. But whether or not we should collect all Americans' phone records all the time should be discussed in public. It should have been revealed in an honest way. The fact that the director of our national intelligence lied to us and said the program didn't even exist, I think is unforgivable and makes him unsuitable to lead our intelligence agency. We have to have trust. Because of this great and enormous power we allow our intelligence agencies to have to have trust. And you can't have trust when Congress is lied to. I think as we move forward, today we've made great strides in presenting arguments in the debate for how we would make things better, how we would better circumscribe this great and ominous power, and how we would better make this power conducive to the Constitution. The ultimate success will be that we can actually change things, but part of the success will be that we've debated them today, and my hope is that the debate today will let the American public, as well as our leadership in the Senate, know that we're serious about this, and that we want to vote on reforms, that we want to vote on several different forms of ways that we can fix this, and that this goes on and comes up every 3 years. For goodness sakes, can't we spend a couple of days trying to amend this, trying to make it better? I want to thank the Senate staff for coming in and staying. I don't think you had much choice, but thank you for staying and not throwing things. We'll try not to do this, but every couple of years or so. I want to thank my staff for their help in a long day. And I want to thank the American people for considering the arguments and hopefully for helping us push this towards a reform where we all respect the Fourth Amendment and the Bill of Rights. Thank you.